Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss Labour's plans for planning reforms as laid out before MPs by Angela Rayner yesterday, and how the political dimension's very different beast for Labour compared to the Conservatives, because both parties in government want more housing than we ever seem to get. And you think, well, why do they struggle to build? Political friction. I've spoken before about how the Conservatives effectively killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. You can look at the way the Tories got almost everything wrong in the last Parliament and agree, look, behaving like that, they were going to lose the election come what may. But what very few spend much time discussing, there has been a little bit, is how the Tories also starved off their access to future voters. The party can move on from its disastrous last few years. Labour will aim to make this difficult by pointing out the sheer level of incompetence and, frankly, piracy which was going on behind closed doors. But the Conservatives, as soon as they decide to take elections seriously again, they can move on. They can absolutely rebuild. They can disown past behaviour, say to voters, look, we're sorry about that. They can kick out the individuals responsible, at least from the senior leadership roles, and say, we've got fresh faces in, present themselves as a change party. We know that works. Only they created another problem for themselves, and it's largely down to housing. It also goes right back to David Cameron, George Osborne. The problem the Tories had was that homeowners form their core support. So you would think this would be powerful motivation to build more homes, right? Only it didn't work out like that. Because you need to build those homes in areas where existing homeowners already live, and they will kick up a stink. They have their homes already. It's a case of pull the ladder up, Jack, I'm all right. They don't want supply increasing and reducing the effective value of their own property. There are some other motivations for NIMBYism as well. They're not in my backyard attitude at play. And in fact, some of them as well, I'll always have to point out, just because a group of people opposes a building project doesn't mean that is automatically NIMBYism. Sometimes there are concerns. One of the things Labour and Angela Rayner has been explicit about is sometimes there are issues where the building project comes in and not all of the infrastructure that's needed is really put in place. So it puts too much pressure on others. That can be a reasonable objection. And Labour are aiming to make sure that the infrastructure has to go alongside it. And Rayner has said a lot of this NIMBYism will fade away when that happens, when people get the infrastructure they need to go alongside it. We will see if it all pans out like that. But what this created for the Conservatives was a fatal dilemma. The problem really was that if the Tories had built houses where they were needed, they'd have cultivated votes for the future in the areas where they need to win from those who bought those houses. But those votes would be for the future, when those people had got through the first 10, 15, maybe 20 years of the mortgage, they were more comfortably off. Not in the first few years when you've mortgaged yourself up to the hilt, you're struggling to make ends meet. So the Tory dilemma was, if they built more houses and built them where they were needed, which would often mean in the areas they need to, try to win to form governments, they would continue to grow their normal supply lines of voters for the future, but they would alienate some of the existing voters right now for the next election. And because politics is by its nature focused on winning the next election, you end up prioritising the short term. But now an entire generation has been unable to get onto the housing ladder. We have people approaching middle age now who have a lower standard of living than when they were in their early 20s at the start of the Conservative government. Their short-sighted thinking may have extended their time in power, but it has made it harder to regain it now in the foreseeable future. And now Labour are talking about ramping up the building of new homes to levels not seen for decades. I mean, they've said 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years. And you think, well, okay, so, about 300,000 homes a year. But we know there's not going to be 300,000 in the first year. It's going to ramp up. Angela Rayner's talked about getting up to 370,000 homes a year. There are, of course, obstacles to this. Can we get the supply of materials? Can we get the supply of workers needed to manage it? Brexit will make both difficult. Can we also make sure that the homes built are good quality whilst meeting the quantity targets as well? Nobody's going to reward Labour for overseeing a programme of crap homes being built that nobody really wants to live in. And from Labour's point of view, it's especially important that the homes are affordable. Rayner talked about You know, there's going to be some building on what's called the green belt. They're calling it the grey belt to distinguish it from actual green bits of the green belt. Remember, the green belt is literally just the space between towns. So it includes a lot of areas that have already been developed for something else and are now in disuse. But Rayner has said, for projects that want to build there, we're going to make sure at least 50% of the homes built are affordable homes. But beyond the logistical problems, which will still prove challenging for Labour, the Tory dilemma doesn't really exist for them on anything like the same scale. It's probably true to say that thanks to Labour winning a lot more seats in like some traditional Tory areas, they're probably going to have a few NIMBY objections coming from their own benches, their own MPs. But I expect those to be muted, I think, for three reasons. First, those same MPs stood on a manifesto of planning reforms explicitly aimed at driving through NIMBY speed barriers. So although, you know, fine, champion some genuine objections, they'd better be that. Second, there will still be a sizable majority in favour of the scale of new home building needed. Most MPs know that their homes need to be built, and they need to be built where they're needed, you know, not just where it's least resisted. And third, even those Labour MPs in areas which might be, you know, a bit of a NIMBY hotbed, and will obviously as constituency MPs have to speak up for their people, they get advantage out of this. Because let's go back to that Tory problem of building new homes. The people who move in, because they're likely to be younger and on tighter budgets, they're not really inclined to vote for a Conservative government. That's why I say that happens later. Once their costs are down, their income is up. That's why I say the Conservatives build new homes. They're fostering voters for the future. But Labour get them immediately. You build 2,000 new homes in an area and you're probably talking 3,000 to 4,000 eligible voters suddenly move into them. And most are ready to vote Labour in the very next election. Not in another generation, right away. You've just invited, and remember it's first past the post system that we unfortunately still have at the moment, so it is a net thing. You invite a net increase of Labour voters into your area. You've effectively diluted the Tory vote. Also, some of the areas which need the new homes did not flip to Labour at all. They either went Lib Dem, Green or stayed Tory. Well, there's no political friction for Labour in those areas at all. You'll have some opposition MPs go, oh, I don't like this in my new area. To which Angela Rayner can stand up and go, well, you need them. You need them. And Rayner's proposals essentially say it should be up to local areas to manage their housing projects. It's like, you know, you should do this, you should hold it, but they're going to face targets. So they can't just choose, oh, we don't need any new houses. No, you do. It's up to you how you do them and where you do them. And if they won't draw up or implement plans to meet the targets, then central government will step in and take over. So it's going to happen. It's either, do you want to make the decisions locally or do you want us to make them? That's what the Labour government will essentially do. In line with Starmer's mission to get local areas making more of their own decisions, it's to say, look, we're giving you the power to do this in the way that meets the needs of your area. You need more housing. We're going to let you manage that process. But if you refuse, we will just do it for you. You can choose. And Rayner talked about getting rid of arbitrary subjective objections to planning applications as well. There's currently a way of blocking projects by having someone describe them as, oh, it's not very beautiful, is it? Or that's literally the word used, or it's not really in keeping with the character of the area. Just makes it too easy for someone to look at some plans and go, no. When what's really motivating is they don't want anything being built. The planning reforms will mean that you shouldn't be able to make subjective decisions like that. It should be focused on meeting housing needs, with requirements also for the proper infrastructure, like I say, to go in place as well. Because what's happened in the past is the Conservative government, in trying to square the circle, because they know they needed more housing, but they didn't want to build where their voters would get annoyed. So what they tried to do is to push projects into the cities. But as it's proved to be, it's way more difficult. It's often not where they're needed, so it doesn't really serve the purpose. Robert Jenrick, one of the Conservative leadership candidates, has been saying, they've abandoned all these projects in cities. That's where they're needed. That's where the houses are needed. You had 14 years to build them there. You weren't able to meet your own housing targets by trying to do that. So it doesn't sound to me like that is really where they're most needed. And the reason the Tories did that, it wasn't because they thought that's where they were most needed, because otherwise, why didn't they get them built then? It's because cities tend to vote Labour. So they tried to dump the problem in areas that wouldn't cost them seats. Only it didn't work. The homes just weren't built. Not because of political problems, but logistics. The Tories ran headfirst into the wall of reality and the wall won. But Labour have a different political pathway. They can build them where the logistics are easier, and it also works for them politically. When their policies are fully implemented, first-time buyers will also get first pick of new builds as well. Combined with getting housing stock up and requiring more affordable homes be built, that will all work towards getting more younger people into these areas. And with a large proportion of younger people tending to vote Labour and a tiny, tiny proportion Tory, even tinier now after their 14 years handiwork, all works out beautifully for Labour. It's a synergy of politics and national interest which very rarely aligns. And there's a final thing to consider as well. Labour have actually made the link between poor access to good quality housing and populism, health problems, and barriers to economic growth. Well, Labour have been clear they want to tackle populism. They've talked about wanting to put more emphasis on the prevention of poor health rather than simply setting the NHS to treat it when it happens. And they never shut up about economic growth. So you've got momentum here for the sorts of changes in two ways, really. Labour see a lot of benefits to meeting these housing targets. Like all governments set targets for things and they don't always meet them. Where they don't meet them, usually it's because either they didn't really have a robust plan to do it, so it turned out that they wanted to do it, but the plan didn't work, or they weren't really that bothered. They weren't motivated enough to really force through the blockages in the pipeline. But Labour see this as being tied very strongly to their election chances in the immediate future. So they're not going to back down to resistance easily. But also what resistance exists, and there is resistance, there's going to be resistance, but what resistance will exist way weaker for Labour than under a Conservative government, because a lot of these projects are going to be built where they're needed. And in a lot of cases, that means areas where Labour's, if they've won the seat, their majority is fairly slim, you would think. Well, who's going to argue against bussing in a load of new Labour voters in the form of new homes, which will attract people who will vote more Labour than Conservative? And in other areas, it will be existing Conservative and Lib Dem areas. It's like, well, that's no electoral skin off our nose. Which means that when the government now say they want more homes built, and they're saying, yeah, we're going to build more homes than has been built for decades, we're looking at a group of ministers who are very serious this time. And literally the only thing that will stop them is practical problems, I think. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.